When we study the Elliott map, the number of burials not only show us where these valiant men were buried, it also tells us their dedication to a cause. This is July 1863. These Southern soldiers, having endured battles before Gettysburg, knew exactly what to expect when they made their attack on the Northern line. They were aware of the devastating effect of infantry fire delivered at close range. They recognized and had endured the effects of canister, but still they advanced. These hash marks are more than graves. They show us where men, ordered to advance in what we know today was a forlorn assault, would come to an end. Having completed several videos that one can access on my YouTube channel, I used the Gettysburg Elliott burial map combined with a current satellite image, allowing us today to approximate the location where these burials were relative to modern features. One area of interest to me, because of the number of Confederate graves, is the ground covered by Wright's brigade's attack on July 2nd, as well as the ground covered by men involved in General James Longstreet's attack on July 3rd. We can guess these graves hold most of the killed from Pickett's, Pettigrew, and Trimble's divisions. To define the location of the graves, I used several common points to establish the area where the graves had rested. These points are the Cadore Barn, the Bryan Farm Barn, and last, the Copse of Trees. By aligning these 3 points with the same points on a satellite image, it produces a satisfactory overlay. To further determine the location of the graves, we can use more convenient features found today on the battlefield. A post and rail fence located near the Bryan Barn with the end resting near the Emmitsburg Road, the famous angle where the regimental monument of the 71st Pennsylvania Infantry rests, and 2 mowed paths leading from the Emmitsburg Road converging at the angle. One of these mowed paths crosses the area where some of the Confederate dead had been buried. One feature indicated on Elliott's map near the graves of Confederate dead is a topographic depression running south to north. As one walks the mowed paths towards the angle, low areas are encountered in areas conforming to the map. Reviewing a satellite image, a distinct natural depression can be seen in the same approximate area. Although the battlefield has had many changes to the terrain over the years, perhaps this is the remnants of Elliott's noted depression. Using a satellite image overlaid with the Elliott map gives us the approximate location of the largest and most concentrated burials on this area of the battlefield. The large number of graves are located primarily in the areas attacked by Pickett's, Pettigrew's, and Trimble's men on July 3rd. Knowing the satellite overlay is not perfectly placed, it still duplicates the fact that during the burial process, the line of graves were altered as they neared the Emmitsburg Road. Confederate graves throughout the battlefield will occupy acres of farmland that will result in lost income for local farmers until the early 1870s, when the remains of the dead were removed. Not only did Abraham Bryan lose field crops because of the battle, he, as well as others, would also lose future income from the ground occupied by the Confederate dead. Estimating the largest area of graves adjacent to the Bryan farm, there would have been a loss of nearly 5 acres of usable ground alone. We often forget the hardship that would devastate the farming community around Gettysburg. As we view the rows of Confederate graves, we cannot forget they were once living beings. These determined men would cross nearly a mile of open ground set on breaking the northern battle line on Cemetery Ridge. The Vermont Chronicle would note in its Tuesday, July 14, 1863 edition, "They charged over the pits. Gibbon orders his men to fall back to the rear of the batteries. It is done without confusion, to allow the artillery the privilege of using grape. Still on, up to the muzzle of the guns. They are blown away, mangled, torn, piled in heaps. The ground is thick with the dead. They lie thick as fallen leaves in autumn." One of the most detailed accounts of the Battle of Gettysburg was written by Lieutenant Frank Haskell, aide-de-camp to General John Gibbon. Following the battle, Haskell would ride the field and write about what he had seen. As he watched the hasty burial of Confederate soldiers, he noted, "The dead of the enemy could not be buried until after the close of the whole battle. The army was about to move. Some of it was already upon the march before such burial commenced. Tools, save those carried by the pioneers, were many miles away with the trains, and the burying parties were required to make all haste in their work in order to be ready to move with their regiments. To make long, shallow trenches, to collect the rebel dead, often hundreds in one place, and to cover them hastily with a little earth without name, number, or mark, save the shallow mound above them. Their names, of course, they did not know, was the best that could be done. I should have been glad to have seen more formal burial, even of these men of the rebellion, both because of the hostilities should cease with death, and to the respect I have for them as my brave, though deluded, countrymen." Henry Ward Beecher, noted clergyman and social reformer, had provided the invocation at the dedication of the Soldiers' Monument in Gettysburg's National Cemetery on July 1, 1869. Prior to his address, he had toured the battlefield and was appalled by the condition of the graves of Confederate soldiers. Beecher would comment, "We went over that field last summer and were shocked at the neglect which on every side forced itself upon the sight. 6 years have gone by, and little or nothing has been done to save the dead from the desecration and outrage. Shallow graves have now been laid bare by the elements. The bones have been torn out by rooting swine." With Beecher's comments and those of others, David Wills, president of the National Cemetery at Gettysburg, in July of 1870, will forward a letter to General Fitzhugh Lee urging the removal of Southern dead from the Gettysburg battlefield. Wills noted, "There should be something done with the remains of the Southern soldiers. There are about 600 marked graves, and they are fast becoming obliterated. Their names might be preserved, and remains gathered together into a cemetery or burying ground if anyone would take the matter in hand." The task of removing the Confederate dead would fall upon Dr. Rufus Benjamin Weaver, taking nearly 3 years to complete the transfers. The Pittsburgh Post of July 8, 1873 would note, "These remains, with the exceptions of a few to be brought out next fall, comprise a remnant of the Confederate dead at Gettysburg, the entire number buried there having been about 3,400. Dr. Weaver has given the work of disinterment his personal attention, and being familiar with the ground, is positive in the belief that none have been left behind. It is somewhat remarkable that the remains of these brave men should find their last resting place just 10 years from the time they were killed, the Battle of Gettysburg having taken place July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863. The courage and tenacity of Confederate soldiers to cross nearly a mile of open ground and attack a protected position still amazes me. As part of Joseph Davis's brigade, Lieutenant William Peel of the 11th Mississippi would note in his diary, "The ashen hue that lingered upon every cheek showed the accuracy with which the magnitude of the task before us was estimated, while the firm grasp that fixed itself upon every musket and the look of steady determination that lurked in every eye bespoke an unflinching resolution to do or die." And today, standing along the Emmitsburg Road, knowing Confederates reached this point where they were receiving the destructive effects of canister and Northern infantry fire, yet their lines pushed on. As the Mississippians crossed the Emmitsburg Road, Lieutenant Peel would recall, "Immediately before us was a small framed house about 20 feet square, the farther end of which joined the fence. Springing forward, we secured its shelter, gaining at the same time a position within 25 feet of the Yankees behind the fence. The boys betook themselves to work before them in good earnest. A number of shots were fired which must have proven very fatal, as the distance was so small. Today, we now know, upon reaching the edge of the Bryan barn, many of these brave Mississippians, including Lieutenant Peel, would surrender to Northern troops." Two brave Mississippians of the 11th Regiment, brothers Henry Clay Wilkins and Davy Crockett Wilkins, both of Company E, would be killed during the advance. They would have shouldered their rifles and made the disastrous walk towards the Northern line, only to be killed with several others near the Emmitsburg Road. The Elliott map notes their graves and the graves of thousands of others by simple hash marks. We can question the accuracy of the Elliott map and its creation. However, it does provide us a snapshot of the cost in human life that resulted from those 3 days of fighting at Gettysburg.